This is the plain of Chalons in northern France. In 451 AD, two enormous armies met here to fight one of the biggest and bloodiest battles of the ancient world. These were dark days for the Roman Empire. The Roman general Attius would try to halt the most feared of all the barbarian tribes, the Huns. They were led by a man of such evil and terrifying reputation he was called the Scourge of God, Attila the Hun. Now, with the help of the latest computer graphics, you're about to see this great battle as never before. The vast numbers of soldiers, the troop formations, how they fought, and how the battle was won. In 451 AD, the Roman Empire was in tatters, the glorious days of Augustus a distant memory. The Roman Empire had once stretched from the Mediterranean Sea and far beyond into Europe, Asia and Africa. By 451 AD, Rome was no longer the centre of government, and the empire was split in two. The Eastern Empire, based in Constantinople, was wealthy and well-maintained. But the Western Empire was overrun by barbarian tribes.
The Roman Empire was neither Roman nor it was an empire. It had been dissected between East and West. It was not in control of its borders.
They would have been progressively hard-pressed to see a oneness in the empire that was about them. It was made up of armies, it was made up of governors, it was made up of garrisons and towns. It had become a fragmented world.
From Ravenna in northern Italy, Valentinian III ruled over the remnants of the Western Empire. He claimed to rule Spain, Gaul and Italy. In reality, these countries were controlled by local leaders and barbarian settlers. Much of Gaul, modern-day France, was ruled by the Visigoths, Spain by the Vandals. But just as the age of Rome's glory seemed to be lost forever, a general emerged to offer new hope, Flavius Attius.
He was obviously a very capable commander with considerable experience. He was clearly a very considerable politician. He had occupied the top spot for quite some years.
Attius had an Italian mother, but was raised among the Visigoths and had even spent a year living with the Huns.
He knew Hunnic ways, he grew up in a silk tent, he learned to ride a horse, probably with the Huns.
He's often called the last of the real Romans, or the last of the noble Romans, or the noble Roman, inasmuch as for 30 years he seems to have been very active on the northwest frontier of Rome in a series of holding actions, trying to keep out Franks, trying to keep out Goths from getting into the unprotected and bountiful areas of central Italy and Spain.
The Western Empire was an enticing target for the barbarian tribes. And in 451 AD, there was one barbarian leader who seemed unstoppable, Attila the Hun.
Attila, or Attila, is represented as the super barbarian.
He was slightly graying, he was bent over, he was very muscular, probably entering middle age, squat, dark, swarthy person.
The Huns were horsemen from the steppes of Asia.
Many of the Germanic tribes were Christians of some shape or form. The Huns were not. And, of course, Attila was described as being, quote, the scourge of God.
Everyone feared the Huns, and with good reason. In a lightning raid through the Eastern Empire, they left behind a trail of death and destruction. St. Jerome, who lived through the early Hun raids, wrote, "They filled the whole earth with slaughter and panic, and they took pity neither upon religion, nor rank, nor race, nor age, nor wailing childhood." By 450 AD, the rich Eastern Empire was paying the Huns an annual tribute of £2,100 of gold to stay away. But although Constantinople had bought her safety, the Huns were restless.
Their very existence was predicated on constant motion. They had to find always new sources of plunder, always new sources of fodder, and to stay in one place would mean that they would literally eat themselves out of their locale within a matter of weeks.
So Attila turned his attention to the Western Empire. Barbarian tribes like the Visigoths and Vandals had now settled within its frontiers, but they ruled themselves and continued to fight with Rome and each other. Much of Gaul was ruled by a Visigoth king, Theodoric. To Attila, the Western Empire appeared rich and divided.
Attila thought that it offered a pretty good cost-benefit ratio. You could plunder it pretty easily, and the chances that you'd be killed or captured or punished were not very great.
The Roman general Attius saw the writing on the wall. He knew the Huns well from having spent time living among them. He'd even been on friendly terms with Attila. But he knew that if Attila was allowed to conquer Gaul, he wouldn't stop until he had swept south into Italy, causing untold devastation. Attius knew he would have to join forces with Theodoric and his Visigoths to save the West. He couldn't defeat the Huns on his own. Though Theodoric was no friend of the Romans, he agreed to fight alongside them. Fear of Attila united these erstwhile enemies. In 451, Attila crossed the Rhine with a huge army. Terrified chroniclers claimed he had more than 500,000 men under his command.
The core of the Hunnic army was surely the Huns themselves. There's no way to tell how many people that means. My guess is surely not more than 10,000 effective Hunnic warriors.
The Huns were famous horse archers, but had also mastered siege warfare, something few barbarian armies had ever been able to achieve. The Huns rampaged through Europe, burning city after city. Cologne, Mainz, Metz, Strasbourg, Reims, until in June 451 they reached Orléans. It was there that Attius caught up with Attila. He was all that now stood between Attila the Hun and the destruction of the West. 451 AD. Attila had destroyed everything in his path as he galloped through Gaul with his horde of Hun horse archers and barbarian allies. The Roman commander Attius rode hard to the city of Orléans with his newly found ally, Theodoric, king of the Visigoths. Their army, like Attila's, was probably dominated by heavy cavalry, but it's impossible to accurately estimate the size of either army. Attius had arrived just in time. Sangiban, the ruler of Orléans, was about to surrender to the Huns. A fierce battle began in the suburbs of the city. Attila, never afraid to retreat if the situation wasn't to his advantage, pulled his men out of the street fight and made for open country. If there was to be a battle, Attila wanted it out in the open spaces where the Hun cavalry could have free rein. Near Châlons, the Huns drew up their wagons in a circle to form a lager and prepared for battle. Attila made no attempt to fight until mid-afternoon. Instead, he stayed inside his wagon circle. No one knows why there was this delay. Maybe Attila was hoping to unnerve the Romans, or perhaps it was he himself who was unnerved by the sudden arrival of this coalition of his enemies. When he finally did march out, most of the daylight had gone. But the Romans had no difficulty in seeing the huge army which formed up behind him.
Attila's plan of attack was pretty simple, and that was to put the Huns themselves in the middle of the battle line and head as quickly and as directly across the field of battle and then tear apart the center of the enemy army.
Attila placed himself in the center of the line with his own Huns, armed with bows and lances. Most of these men, who combined mobility, firepower and the ability to fight in close, were veterans of a dozen battles and skirmishes. On his flanks he placed his barbarian allies, the Ostrogoths, Ardaric and Gepids. These horsemen would have been armed with spears and swords, relying on mobility and momentum to inflict damage. On the other side of the battlefield, Attius placed his Romans on the left flank. he ordered Theodoric and his Visigoths to line up on the right flank. In the centre, he put his weakest link, Sangiban, and his unreliable tribesmen, the Alans. It came as no surprise when Attila prepared to strike at the weakest point of the Roman line.